Hello folks, right at the end of last week, just after I uploaded my update, PC Gamer released an interview with game director Ion Hazzikostas, where they asked him about the issues with the launch of patch 11.15 and the players' reaction to the timegating of the content. I'll link to that article down below as it is worth a read, but in his responses Ion did acknowledge that the patch had missed the mark and promised to do better. With this response, it's pretty obvious that there was no way they were going to allow Horrific Visions to go live this week with the levels of additional timegating that we saw in the PTR, was there? Oh Blizzard, why do you do this to yourself? Sadly, the launch of the highly anticipated return of Horrific Visions was overshadowed by a player-driven backlash to the extreme levels of timegating. The Visions were initially gated in 4 ways. Firstly, the number of the new currency for the Vision upgrade tree was limited to 3. Secondly, in the tree itself, only the first row was available, with the other rows also being gated, meaning that the tree only gives an illusion of choice. On top of that, the new corruption-based head enchant is also gated with only the lesser version available this week, with presumably, but not confirmed, the greater version only being obtainable next week. But the biggest source of player anger was that the cosmetics vendor was also timegating, which meant that even though we had unlimited attempts at Visions, once you got your 3 upgrades and that head enchant, you really had nothing to do with the currency, which meant that there seemed to be little point to do more than maybe 4 to 6 runs. Taking all of this together, for me it really made it feel like the game was telling me not to play. And even setting aside Ion's comments and the feedback in the PTR, I am genuinely at a loss to understand how the game designers did not see that this was setting up the content to fail. The timegating on the vendor was thankfully removed after just a matter of a few hours, and this combined with the Visions having other ways to progress power beyond the upgrade tree and a general feeling that the Visions are somewhat easier than the BFA versions were back in the day has done much to settle down player anger. But this does not mean there are still not issues with the Visions. That relaxed difficulty means that by the time we get the next row of the upgrade tree unlocked and the reset, for many people I suspect it's kinda going to feel just like a bit of pointless busy work to fill it out. Fortunately, I suspect most of us will have enough currency saved up by then that we'll be able to just unlock the entire row in day 1 and then go back to forgetting about it, which does leave me thinking that perhaps the developer time could have been better spent elsewhere. And for players who, unlike all of us, do not follow Wowhead and other sources and therefore know how all of the timegating works, that talent tree is pretty confusing. One thing that I noticed when I was selecting items was that while I could not select any of the second row of talents, there was nothing in the user interface to explain why. And frankly, if I had not been aware of the PTR, I would have assumed it was broken. While we're all used to turning to sites like Wowhead and Icy Veins, misses like this do create barriers for new and more casual returning players. Content launching with major pacing issues only to then receive major adjustments in response to player feedback has become a bit of a pattern for Blizzard. Siren's Isle also had time gates that had to be removed. And of course, we saw both Flames Radiance and the Undermine Cartel reputations having to be doubled. In the past, I have talked in these videos about the development team having some lessons to learn, but right now there's really no sign of those lessons actually being learned and leading to noticeable changes. And from what I see online, I am not the only member of the player base that is starting to get a bit cynical and frustrated about new content releases. So let's hope Ion's apparent awareness that this is a major issue will soon translate into some improvements in game. Now, Ion's interview with PC Gamer also extended to the subject of the recently announced plans to roll more add-on functionality into the base UI, and potentially to restrict add-on functionality in the future, and PC Gamer was able to get some details about what Blizzard's plans on the latter might be. In his interview, Ion emphasised that the focus is on Raid, Mythic Plus and PvP encounters, assuring that things like auction house, questing and gathering add-ons should be perfectly safe. So what exactly is in the firing line? Well, Ion spoke about restricting the ability of add-ons to see group and opponent cooldowns, to track buffs and debuffs, and to conditionally modify nameplates, which will most likely impact popular add-ons like Omni CD, Plater and Weak Orders. Now, Ion did go on to say that this would be accompanied by plans they have to improve how buffs are displayed, and even adding some new functionality like being able to see the diminishing returns that are applied to crowd controls, for example. All of this will be in the name of reducing encounter complexity, with Ion explaining that the power of add-ons tends to make 2010 style fight designs feel quite dull, forcing them to use mechanics that some players are starting to find annoying, like incessant movement for casters. Ion also suggested that this would likely become a forcing function on the encounter design team to improve things like how they telegraph boss abilities, noting that in a world with less add-ons and raid encounters, issues with boss mechanics would likely require much more aggressive fixes and changes, something that we are already seeing coming from the team. In terms of timing, Ion said that this would not be a thing for patches 11.17 or 11.12, and my own personal read in what he said is that it might suggest that the changes will start to come with midnight, which I think is a bit sooner than many of us expected. Now, I do think that most of the player base would welcome add-ons feeling a lot less mandatory, especially in mainstream and higher end content, and for me these plans do sound very good in principle, but at the same time I do have some serious doubts about the timing. At this moment in time, the WoW dev team is visibly struggling to consistently release content with the level of quality that I think even they would want. Launching what will be very high impact changes to how add-ons work will be a very high risk move, with major downsides to both the player experience but also player trust if the changes do not deliver the necessary results. Blizzard will only have one chance at this, and if it goes awry and had to be rolled back or watered down, it's very unlikely they would ever be able to convince the player base to accept any further changes. We've already seen the cooldown manager largely be ignored by most players thanks to a lack of basic functionality and a failure to act upon player feedback during testing. And my own personal feedback to Blizzard is that for now, the focus should be in creating the time and space for the dev team to improve their releases and start to rebuild frayed player trust. Major add-on restrictions will go much more smoothly if the player base feels it can trust Blizzard to do it well. And right now, I don't think that we're in that place. The PC Gamer interview was not Ion's only appearance this week. He also gave a presentation at the Nordic Game Developer Conference. This was to an audience of other game developers and focused on the lessons that Ion and his team have learned over his tenure as game designer. This, as it turned out, mainly covered the major changes in direction of the game following Shadowlands. Ion talked about how when he took over, he saw his role to be a caretaker of World of Warcraft's legacy, and this led the dev team to see changes in how the player base were approaching the game as a problem, revealing that when the team noticed that players were less attached to their main characters, they tried to restore that connection, first by designing the Legion artifact system to reward players who chose a single spec over those who wanted to multi-spec, and later on with the notorious meaningful choice in Shadowlands. This, as we all know, did not go well for Blizzard, but it appears that it was Classic that had the biggest impact in changing their minds. When vanilla was current, the very high respec costs led players who wanted to multi-spec to make do with less optimal crossover builds. But in Classic, the developers found that today's players would not accept that and will do whatever it takes to meet the respec costs, typically complaining very loudly about it as they do. This ultimately was what led the team to realise that fighting against the changing player base was, well, rather unwise, leading them to develop their new philosophies, essentially of trying to build the game to meet players as they are today. Those of you who stuck through the dark times of Shadowlands will remember the rather abrupt change in the development team in patch 9.15, and while I'm still pretty sure that this was part and due to the team facing an existential threat from the massive numbers of players who were quitting the game in 9.10, it does appear that at least in part, there was some internal lessons that were being lesson learned, and I do wonder where the modern game might have been today if Classic had not launched. This also, I think, does explain the massive changes in Mythic Plus in Season 2. In my view, Season 1 was in part an attempt by the developers to increase the difficulty of Mythic Plus and try to close the gap with Mythic raiding, perhaps to try and get more people to engage with high-end raiding. This of course also backfired a bit, with Season 1 being judged by the players as one of the worst Mythic Plus seasons ever, but unlike in the past, the developers quickly backed off. The end result is that Season 2 of Mythic Plus is, in my view, been a pretty decent success. If I am correct though, this would suggest that the slow decline in Mythic raiding is now in Blizzard's radar. And if raising the difficulty of Mythic Plus isn't the solution, and to be clear, I don't think it was ever going to be, one wonders what Blizzard will be attempting next, as all the indications from the new Season 2 denial system is that the reward system won't be enough to get people into Mythic raiding. Time will tell, of course, but I suspect that we are going to see some major changes to the Mythic raid. If not for Season 3, then for Midnight, and I do wonder what that will look like. And finally, if you're someone who likes to collect the World of Warcraft books, the Prequel book for Midnight has now been announced and is available for pre-orders, links down below. Written by veteran World of Warcraft author Christy Golden, Blood Ties will feature Addon, Illyria and Turalian's son, investigating an abandoned Legion base, which is perhaps an interesting hint about a possible future story direction. Blood Ties will be releasing on November the 18th, and the timing of this, I think, strengthens the very widespread speculation that Season 3 will be the final season of The War Within, with Midnight most likely releasing in early 2026, my own bet being either late February or early March. And that's all for this week. I'd be super interested to hear your thoughts on the Visions revamp. Setting aside the Timegating, I have been pleasantly surprised. I was never a fan of the Battle for Azeroth version, but this time around, without the pressure of having to ration limited attempts to level up a legendary cloak, I've been having a decent time farming out all the mounts. So are you enjoying the new format, or are you still having burnout from BFA? Let me know in the comments down below. If you found this update helpful, entertaining, or even just plain annoying, then do let me know by hitting that like icon. And if you want to support my channel to grow and help me make more of these videos along with my other content, then do hit that subscribe button right now before you forget. And if you don't want to miss out whenever I release a new video, then as well as subscribing, you can follow me on social media for notifications. My links are in the description below as well. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.